The billionaire CEO mocked his poor ex at his New Year's Eve party, unaware she now owned a multi-billion-dollar company and raised his secret twins. She walked in like she had nothing to prove. And that was the most dangerous thing about her. The ballroom was loud with champagne and consequence, every voice pitched just high enough to be heard over the next, every smile calculated to land on the right face. New Year's Eve at the Monarch Hotel was not a party. It was a performance, and Adrian Steele had been its lead actor for 11 consecutive years. He was mid-laugh when he saw her, not the laugh he gave the room, that practiced, resonant sound that made investors feel chosen and rivals feel small. Something else moved through him in that instant, something that short-circuited the performance entirely and left him standing very still in the middle of 500 people, a champagne flute halfway to his lips, staring at a woman he had spent 20 years trying to forget. Natalie. She was different. Of course she was different. 20 years do not pass over a person without leaving their mark. Her hair was shorter now, falling in soft waves where it used to cascade. Her face had moved from pretty into something more precise. Cheekbones more defined. Eyes carrying a depth that only comes from surviving things nobody saw. She wore a midnight blue dress, simple and elegant, without a single piece of jewelry designed to announce itself. She looked like someone who had nothing left to prove to a room like this, and she was walking directly toward him. Adrian Steele, founder and CEO of Steel Horizons Group, four-time Forbes cover, a man who had not been caught off guard by anything in recent memory, felt his next words dissolve before they formed. She reached him, stopped, looked up at him with those eyes he still recognized in his sleep sometimes, though he had never admitted that to anyone, including himself. She said, simply, "Adrian?" He found his voice from somewhere beneath the shock. "Natalie Voss." He kept it low, controlled, the way he kept everything. "You have to be the boldest woman in Manhattan to walk through that door." She didn't flinch. She smiled, and it was not the smile he remembered. Not the warm, open thing that used to undo him at close range. This one was composed, knowing. The smile of a woman who had already decided how this conversation would go before she arrived. "Wonderful party," she said. "You've always had a gift for excess." His jaw tightened. "This is a private event." "I'm aware." She reached into her clutch, produced an invitation. Ivory cardstock, gold, embossed seal. The holographic watermark his security director had assured him was impossible to replicate. She held it out with 2 fingers, like she was returning something that had never belonged to him. He took it, checked it. Every detail was correct. He looked back at her. "Who gave you this?" "Does it matter?" Her gaze moved past him, sweeping the ballroom with the calm attention of someone conducting an assessment, not seeking approval. "I'm already inside." Something moved at the back of his chest, old and complicated, and not entirely anger. "What do you want?" he said. "Money? Is that what this is? You've come back after 20 years because you finally need something?" Something crossed her face then, fast. A flash of real pain, almost immediately replaced by a steadiness that was worse somehow than anger would have been. "Not everything is about your bank account, Adrian." Her voice remained level, remarkably level. "I'm here because I have a business meeting. Meridian Capital's CEO is attending tonight. I have a partnership to finalize." He almost laughed. He did laugh, a short, sharp sound that he immediately regretted. "You work in finance now, Natalie? I don't work in finance." She said it quietly, no drama, no performance. "I am finance. I'm the founder and CEO of Voss Meridian Technologies." The name landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples moved outward immediately, touching every edge of what he thought he knew. Voss Meridian Technologies. $4.3 billion valuation, revolutionary AI-driven financial security infrastructure. The company his acquisitions team had spent 8 months trying to reach, their calls unreturned, their offers refused, their most aggressive pursuit met with absolute silence from a founder nobody had managed to identify or photograph. Their founder was Natalie. His Natalie, the woman he had spent 2 decades believing had used him, left him, dissolved into irrelevance. But what Adrian Steele did not know yet, What would quietly detonate every certainty he had constructed over the last 20 years was that Natalie had not only built a $4 billion empire in the time since she disappeared, she had also raised his sons. Twin boys, 18 years old, boys who had inherited his jaw and her depth, his instinct and her conscience. Boys who had grown up knowing exactly who their father was, his photograph beside their beds, his name in their mother's stories, his qualities named and honored even in his absence. Boys who were, at this precise moment, waiting in a suite 12 floors above this ballroom, doing homework and reading journals and trying to pretend they were not thinking about the man downstairs. Boys who had never met him, and a woman who had decided, after 20 years, that the time for waiting was over. Have you ever watched your entire understanding of your own life begin to quietly unravel? Not all at once, but piece by piece, the way a hem comes loose in the dark and you don't notice until everything falls? Have you ever discovered that the person you dismissed, the person you told yourself didn't matter, had been carrying something for you all along? Something so significant it could rewrite every story you believed about yourself? If you have, then you already understand what this night was about to cost Adrienne Steele. This story is for every woman who has ever rebuilt herself in silence. Every woman who chose her children over her own heartbreak and her dignity over someone else's approval. Every woman who walked back into a room that once dismissed her, not for revenge, not for validation, but because the truth had waited long enough and the people she loved deserved better than secrets. Natalie Voss did not just survive being pushed out of a powerful man's world. She built a better one. And she raised two extraordinary human beings while doing it, completely alone on her own terms, without asking anyone for permission. If that resonates with you, stay with me, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't forget. The Monarch Hotel had been the venue for Adrienne's New Year's celebration for 11 consecutive years, and each year, the event had grown in direct proportion to the growth of Steele Horizons Group. More guests, more security, more carefully managed grandeur, until the evening had become less a celebration and more a demonstration of exactly how much power one man could accumulate without appearing to try. The Grand Soleil Ballroom occupied the entirety of the hotel's 42nd floor. 500 guests moved beneath chandeliers that cost more than most people's annual salaries, their conversations a layered symphony of deal-making dressed as small talk. The champagne was French, the catering was Michelin-starred, and the string quartet in the northeast corner played well enough that guests occasionally paused to actually listen, which was the highest compliment available in a room where attention was the rarest currency. Adrienne had arrived at precisely 8:15, which was 15 minutes after the official start time, late enough to signal that his attendance was a gift being bestowed, early enough to ensure the evening unfolded according to his intentions. He wore a charcoal tuxedo that had been made for him specifically, without a single logo or label to announce itself, because a man of his stature did not need clothing to speak on his behalf. At 44, Adrienne Steele had the particular stillness of someone who had long since stopped competing and started simply existing at a frequency others strained to reach. He was not the tallest man in the room, he did not have the loudest laugh or the most demonstrative presence. What he had was something more difficult to name. A quality of complete certainty, of absolute comfort in his own authority, that made the space around him contract slightly, as though the room itself adjusted its geometry to accommodate him. Prescott Lang, chairman of a rival infrastructure firm, materialized at his elbow with the practiced timing of a man who had been watching for an opening. "Extraordinary quarter," Prescott said, offering his hand with the energy of someone about to ask for something. "The Varela acquisition alone. I have to say, Adrienne, that was inspired. The timing, the valuation you got them at." "Prescott." Adrienne accepted the handshake with a measured warmth. "I heard your Singapore venture stalled at regulatory review." A small pause. Prescott's smile didn't waver, but something behind it did. "These things take time." "They do," Adrienne agreed pleasantly and moved on. He worked the room with the efficiency of long practice. A word to Senator Hartwell about the infrastructure bill that touched 3 of Adrienne's holding companies. A compliment precisely calibrated to the CEO of a media conglomerate whose acquisition he was considering. A brief exchange with the head of a European sovereign wealth fund, conducted partly in French, leaving the man visibly gratified. Each interaction lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and ended on Adrian's terms, which was the only way interactions in his world ever ended. He had almost convinced himself it would be an ordinary evening. Then he saw her in the entrance, and the champagne flute stopped moving halfway to his lips. His first thought was that grief did strange things at significant dates. He had learned this years ago, the way the mind would occasionally manufacture ghosts from expensive champagne and the particular weight of milestone evenings. New Year's carried that quality more than most. The specific loneliness of counting down in a room full of people who wanted something from you. But she did not dissolve the way ghosts dissolve when you look directly at them. She remained, solid, present, standing in the entrance of his ballroom with the particular stillness of a woman who was entirely comfortable taking up space in a room that had not invited her. 20 years. He would have recognized her in a stadium, in a crowd of 10,000. There was something about the way she stood, always had been, that was absolutely specific to her. A quality of quiet self-possession that had been remarkable in a 24-year-old and was extraordinary in the woman before him now. Diana Leland, wife of his CFO, appeared at his shoulder. Wasn't she your assistant years ago? "Excuse me," Adrian said, and moved through the crowd before Diana could complete the sentence. The sea of guests parted with the unconscious deference of people who had learned over the years that Adrian Steele did not pause for obstacles. He moved toward the entrance with the focused intention of a man who had decided to deal with the situation before it became a problem. Natalie saw him coming. Of course she did. She had always had that quality, an awareness of a room that registered everything without appearing to watch anything. Her chin lifted slightly as he approached. A gesture he remembered from their past. From the particular way she prepared herself for a confrontation, she had already decided she would not lose. He stopped 2 feet from her, close enough to speak privately, far enough to demonstrate that the distance between them was entirely intentional. "Natalie Voss," he said, keeping his voice at a register that wouldn't carry. "You have to be the boldest woman in Manhattan to walk through that door." "Adrian." Her voice was warm. Genuinely, infuriatingly warm, as though this were a coincidental meeting between old acquaintances and not whatever this was. "Wonderful party. You've always had a gift for excess. This is a private event." "I know." She opened her clutch and produced the invitation, and something about the gesture, the complete lack of defensiveness in it, the ease of a woman presenting evidence she has always known would hold, sent something uncomfortable moving through him. She held it out, the traditional way, one of these. He examined it, every security detail correct, the holographic watermark, the embossed seal. The personalized guest code his team had spent $40,000 implementing specifically to prevent incidents like this. "Who gave you this?" "Someone on your guest list who thought the right people should be in the room." She tilted her head slightly. "Does the method of arrival matter more than the reason I'm here?" "What reason is that?" "Business." She said it simply. "Meridian Capital's CEO will be here tonight. I have a partnership to finalize. I thought it was more efficient to attend than to schedule a separate meeting in the new year." He studied her, looking for the angle. 20 years of building a company that dealt in information and security had made him very good at identifying when something was not what it presented itself as. But Natalie's expression gave him nothing to work with. Not anxiety, not aggression, not the overperformed calm of someone concealing urgency. Just a level, unhurried gaze of a woman with somewhere specific to be. "What company?" he asked, because he needed a specific answer and because something in her composure suggested the answer would be significant. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second before she answered. "Voss Meridian Technologies," she said. "I'm the founder and CEO." Later, he would try to reconstruct the exact sequence of his internal response to those 5 words. There was something first that felt like simple disbelief, the ordinary resistance of a mind encountering information that doesn't fit its existing architecture. Then a rapid, involuntary cross-referencing as his mind moved through everything he knew about Voss Meridian. The valuation, the technology, the impossible privacy of its founder, the months his team had spent trying to arrange a meeting and being refused every time. And then, beneath all of it, something older and less rational, something that had been very still for 20 years and moved now with a speed he was not prepared for. She had built this woman he had told himself was a chapter he'd closed, an unfortunate lesson in misplaced trust. She had built a $4 billion company, without his name, without his connections, without anything he had ever provided her. That's impressive, he managed. The words came out slightly rougher than he intended. Yes, she agreed, without false modesty and without performance. It is. An urgent voice at his shoulder, his assistant Jonah, appearing with the apologetic expression of someone delivering genuinely bad news at a genuinely bad moment. Mr. Steele, the Meridian Capital contingent is asking for you, the Varela integration. Tell them I'll be there in 2 minutes. He turned back to Natalie, but she had already used the interruption. She was gone. He spent the next hour doing what he was paid and celebrated for, hosting with precision, charming with intention, managing relationships and impressions, and the elaborate social architecture of an event designed to consolidate his position for the coming year. He did all of it correctly. He said the right things to the right people. He laughed at the right moments and turned serious at the right moments, and ensured that every person who mattered left their conversation with him feeling uniquely valued. But his attention was divided in a way it had never been at one of these events before. Something had come loose in the careful machinery of his evening, and no amount of professional discipline was entirely sealing it back. He found her again from across the room, perhaps 40 minutes after their initial exchange. She was in conversation with the Meridian Capital CEO, a man named Forsyth, who Adrian had been cultivating for 2 years, and she was speaking with the particular animation that Adrian remembered from the late nights at Reed Innovations years ago, when she would explain a technical solution she had found, and her whole face would change, lit from within by the specific pleasure of a problem solved beautifully. Forsyth was leaning in, engaged, sold, or very close to it. Adrian looked away. At 11 o'clock, he moved onto the private terrace that ran along the ballroom's north face. He had done this every year, a brief solitary interval in the proceedings to reset himself before the countdown. The December air was sharp and clean, the Manhattan skyline spread out before him in its relentless, gorgeous excess, 10,000 lit windows testifying to the scale of ambition that had made this city what it was. He had barely been there 2 minutes when he heard the terrace door open behind him. He turned. Natalie stepped out, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders against the cold. She stopped when she saw him, and for just a moment, the first moment of the entire evening, her composure shifted. Not much. A fraction. The slight recalibration of someone who had prepared for a conversation and is now encountering it a little ahead of schedule. Then the composure returned. "You always preferred the terrace," she said, not accusatory, simply noting it. "Some things don't change." He turned back to the skyline, though he was acutely aware of her moving to the railing, a careful 3 feet away. "Some things change completely. Like me walking into your party as a company CEO instead of your former employee. Former assistant. I was never just an assistant." He conceded this silently, because it was true, and they both knew it. Natalie Voss at 24 had been one of the most technically brilliant people he had ever encountered, and he had spent 18 months pretending, in the public context of their professional relationship, that she was primarily there to manage his calendar. "Why are you really here?" he asked, not aggressively, genuinely. "After 20 years, why now?" She was quiet for a moment. The city breathed below them. Somewhere to the east, a clock was already beginning the peripheral countdown. "I told you," she said, "business." Natalie. Something in his tone, something he hadn't intended to let through, made her turn to look at him. "The Meridian partnership would have been arranged over email," he said. "You didn't need to attend this event. You specifically avoided public appearances for 16 years. I know that now. I know who you are. I've been cross-referencing since you told me. So why here? Why tonight?" She studied him, the way she had always studied him, not trying to read his expression, but deciding how much of her own to give. "Your father," she said at last. 2 words, and the December air around them dropped several degrees colder. He went very still. "My father has been dead for 3 years. "I know," her voice was quiet. "That's why I'm here now, Adrian, not before. Because of what he did, and because he's no longer alive to do it again, and because the people affected by what he did are old enough now to make their own choices about what they want. He turned to face her fully. "What are you talking about? What did my father do?" She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw something he had not been prepared for. Not anger, not bitterness, but the specific steady sorrow of a woman who had carried a truth for a very long time and had finally arrived at the place where she could set it down. "Not tonight," she said softly. "Not like this, in the middle of your event. When you're ready to hear everything, really hear it, you'll know how to find me." She adjusted her shawl, turned toward the terrace door. "Natalie?" He reached out and stopped just short of touching her arm. She paused. "Tell me one thing. Are you all right?" The question surprised her. He could see it. A small, unguarded response that crossed her face before she could arrange her features back into composure. "I'm better than all right," she said. And there was something in it that was genuine and enormous, and that he didn't yet have the context to understand. "Good night, Adrian." She went back inside. He remained on the terrace for a long time, the city glittering below him, a full glass of scotch growing cold in his hand, and something moving through his chest that he had not felt in 20 years. A combination of recognition and loss, and the particular unease of a man who has just realized that a story he believed he had finished reading still has hundreds of pages left. Inside the ballroom, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. He did not go back in. 7, 6, 5. He stood at the railing in the December cold and thought about a woman who had vanished from his life 2 decades ago, who had apparently spent those 2 decades building something extraordinary, who had walked into his party tonight with the composure of someone who had already won and had not yet decided how much to reveal. 4, 3, 2. And the thing she had said about his father, the way she had said it, not with accusation but with the exhausted certainty of something long known, moved through him again like a cold current. 1. The ballroom erupted behind him. Fireworks cracked open over the Hudson, flooding the sky with color. Adrian Steele stood alone on his private terrace above a city that celebrated endings and beginnings with equal theatrical enthusiasm, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that he did not know the shape of his own story. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his home office until 3 in the morning with a glass of 18-year-old scotch and his laptop open to the Voss Meridian Technologies profile page, reading the same carefully worded corporate biography 4 times, looking for something between the lines that would give him purchase. The founder photograph was not available. The company history began 16 years ago with a patent filing in Toronto. Before that, nothing public. The woman had been a ghost. His most capable researcher, Marcus, had the initial file on his desk by 7 the following morning. Adrian read it standing up, still in the clothes he'd worn to the party, the scotch replaced by black coffee, dawn pressing gray against his floor-to-ceiling windows. Voss Meridian Technologies, incorporated in Ontario 16 years ago. 11 foundational patents, all in Natalie's name. First major client secured in year 3. A mid-sized Canadian bank whose financial security had subsequently become the envy of the sector. Growth from there, careful, deliberate, never overextended, each expansion funded primarily by revenue rather than investor capital. A company built with the conservatism of someone who had learned, somewhere, that foundations matter more than speed. Current valuation, $4.3 billion. Current employees, 912. Founder profile, essentially private, no social media, no public speaking circuit. The one keynote address, given 4 years ago at a closed-door financial security summit in Zurich, had not been recorded at the speaker's request. He moved to the personal file. Natalie Voss, primary residence, Toronto, Rosedale neighborhood. Property purchased 14 years ago, outright, no mortgage. Personal status, single, never married. He turned the page. Family. His hand stopped moving. 2 sons, twins, age 18, born September 4th. He set the coffee down, very carefully, on the edge of the desk, because he did not trust himself to hold it. He did the calculation without wanting to. His mind completed it before he could instruct it otherwise. September, -9 months. December, their December. The last month she had been in his life. No, he said aloud, to nobody in the empty room. But the document didn't change. Their names were Eli and Caleb Voss. Eli enrolled at MIT, first year, studying computational mathematics, already co-author on 2 peer-reviewed papers published while he was still in secondary school. Described by his department chair, in the one press mention Marcus had found, as the most naturally gifted mathematical mind I've encountered in 30 years of teaching. Caleb had deferred his university acceptance to serve as chief of operations at Voss Meridian Technologies. At 18, the board had approved the appointment unanimously. Industry observers had noted, in the careful language of people trying not to seem shocked, that his operational instincts appeared to be approximately 15 years ahead of his stated experience. There was one photograph. A company milestone dinner 3 years ago. Natalie at the center of a table of executives, her sons on either side of her. Eli on the left, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, listening intently to something being said off-frame. Caleb on the right turned toward his mother, his expression carrying the particular attentiveness of someone who is simultaneously managing the logistics of the evening and making sure she's all right. Adrian stared at the photograph for a long time. He didn't need a test, he didn't need documentation, he didn't need anything except the photograph and the date of their birth and the specific way Caleb held his shoulders. The exact posture, unconscious and specific, that Adrian had seen in his own reflection every morning of his adult life. These were his sons. He had sons. He had sons who were 18 years old and brilliant and already building things, who had grown up in Toronto while he had built an empire in New York and told himself the chapter was closed, who had a mother who had apparently spent those 18 years protecting them from something he didn't yet understand and raising them with the same ferocious, quiet precision she had applied to everything she had ever done. He had sons he had never met. He sat down, the first time he had sat down in several hours. Outside his window, New York went about the business of its first day of the new year with its customary indifference to individual reckoning. His phone was in his hand. He found the number Marcus had included in the file. Natalie's direct mobile, obtained through channels Adrian preferred not to examine too closely, and he looked at it for a long time. Then he saw the notification. A message, sent from a number he didn't recognize, time-stamped 6:47 in the morning. You'll have questions. I expected that. Room 2409, Monarch Hotel. 7 this evening. Come alone. N. He read it twice. Then below it, a second message, sent 30 seconds after the first. They have your hands, the way you hold things, like you're always about to build something. They have always done that, since they were small. Adrian Steele, who had navigated hostile takeovers and congressional hearings, and the specific battlefield of inherited power with a composure that had become his most documented characteristic, sat in the first light of a new year and felt the room move in a way that had nothing to do with the physical. He pressed his palms flat against the desk, felt the solid edge of the wood beneath his hands. He typed back one word. 7. He spent the hours between morning and evening doing something he almost never did. He canceled everything. A board call, a lunch with a senator, a conference with his legal team about a pending acquisition. He told Jonah to hold everything, that he was unavailable, that the world would need to manage itself for one day. Then he sat with the file, with the photograph, with the mathematics of a timeline. He kept running and reaching the same conclusion. He had known Natalie Voss for 18 months before she disappeared, had loved her in the complete and specific way that only happens once. He had understood this at the time and had spent 20 years trying to reclassify the feeling as something smaller and more manageable, something that could be filed under youthful error and moved past. He had been 24 when he started Reed Innovations, his company before the restructuring and expansion that had turned it into Steel Horizons Group. He had spent his father's seed money on a small team in a Brooklyn warehouse and a vision for security technology that everyone told him was ahead of its time. His father had provided the initial capital with the particular grace of a man issuing a challenge, an investment, not a gift, with expectations attached that were never fully stated and therefore impossible to satisfy. When his overworked assistant had quit without notice in the company's 6th month, Adrian had conducted the interviews himself. He had no patience for the 3 candidates who had come before her. All competent, all correct, all entirely unmemorable. The fourth candidate had sat across the desk from him and, before he could deliver his opening question, had said, "I've reviewed your encryption architecture. You have 3 vulnerabilities your development team hasn't caught. I can diagram them if you have a notepad." He had stared at her. A notepad would be useful, she had confirmed. He'd slid one across the desk. She had diagrammed the vulnerabilities in 7 minutes, explained each one with a clarity that made his best engineer look, in retrospect, somewhat inattentive, and then looked up at him with the calm patience of someone waiting for the next question. He had hired her before she finished the last diagram. "You should be in the development team," he'd said, "not managing my calendar." "Your HR department disagrees. They looked at my computer science degree and my 7 years of coding experience and scheduled me for the administrative track." She tilted her head. "I applied to both positions. I took whichever interview was offered because I wanted to work here. I believe in what you're building." He had spent the next 6 months recategorizing her upward with increasing speed, until her formal title was the only thing separating her from what she actually was, which was essential. He had also spent those 6 months trying, with declining success, not to notice her. It was inevitable in the way that certain things are inevitable, not fated but generated by proximity and compatibility and the specific combustion of 2 people who understand each other in ways that are neither expected nor easily explained. They worked late. They argued productively. They reached conclusions together that neither would have reached alone. And the particular pleasure of that, the way her mind worked alongside his, not behind it or in front of it, but genuinely alongside, was something he had not experienced before and has not experienced since. The night they finally stopped resisting it, they had been alone in the office at 2 in the morning, celebrating a contract win that had felt impossible 3 weeks earlier. The team had gone home hours before. There was half a bottle of champagne left on the conference table and the particular quiet of a building that is entirely theirs. Natalie had lifted her glass and said, "To the company that's going to change how the world thinks about security." He had said, "To the woman who helped me understand what we were actually building." She had looked at him then. And something in the look, the directness of it, the warmth in it, the complete and specific attention of it, had made every other consideration irrelevant. "We shouldn't," she had said. "Probably not," he had agreed. "It would complicate everything." "Undoubtedly." Neither of them moved away. She had smiled then, a different smile, intimate and knowing, the smile of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it. "Then again," she had said, "we've never been conventional about anything. Why start now?" What followed was the most genuine period of Adrian Steele's life, though he would not have used that word for it at the time. He would have said it was extraordinary, exceptional, unprecedented. All the words that kept appropriate distance. But the truth, which he had spent 20 years not examining, was simpler. He had been known by her. Completely and without the performance that his life otherwise required, he had been genuinely known by another person, and it had changed the composition of his daily experience in ways so fundamental that he had not understood what he'd lost until the morning she was gone. They moved in together after 6 months. They built a life that was quieter and more specific than anything his public persona suggested, shared cooking experiments that were occasionally catastrophic, long conversations about technology and philosophy and the complicated architecture of his relationship with his father, weekend drives to nowhere in particular because she said movement helped her think, and he had discovered she was right. He had begun, privately, thinking about a ring. The only shadow was Raymond Steele. His father had never approved. Adrian had known this and had, for the first time in his adult life, decided that his father's approval was not the relevant metric. Raymond's objections were the familiar ones: pedigree, background, the Reed legacy, a dozen coded expressions of a man who sorted people into categories and had assigned Natalie to one that Adrian found contemptible. "She's using you," Raymond had said over one of their rare dinners, calm and reasonable and absolutely certain, the way he said everything. A woman from her background, with her family situation. She sees the Steele name and she sees security. "That's not love, Adrian. That's strategy." "You don't know her," Adrian had said. "I know the type." Raymond had cut his meat with the precision of a surgeon. "They never ask directly. That's how you know they're serious. They're patient. They wait. Adrian had left that dinner angry and had told Natalie about it, which was the first of his mistakes, though he had not recognized it at the time. He should have seen in her careful response, the quiet way she absorbed the information, the slight distance that appeared in her eyes before she pulled it back, that she was afraid of something specific. Not of Raymond's opinion, but of what Raymond was capable of. He had not seen it. 2 months later, on a Tuesday morning, Natalie received a message requesting her presence at Raymond Steele's office. She did not tell Adrian she was going. That evening, he came home to an apartment that felt the same and was entirely different. Her things were still there, her presence was not. And on the kitchen counter, a note in her handwriting, short and specific as everything she wrote. "I'm sorry, this is for the best. Please don't try to find me." He had stood in his kitchen for a long time, reading 4 sentences, trying to locate within them something that made sense. Then the grief had come. And after the grief, the anger. And after the anger, the cold resolution that had governed the next 20 years. The decision, made in the first weeks of her absence and never fully revisited, that she had calculated an exit and taken it. That what they had shared had been genuine on his side and managed on hers. That his father, for all his cruelties, had been right about the fundamental thing. He had thrown himself into work with the focused desperation of a man trying to outrun something that has already caught him. He acquired, he expanded. He restructured and relocated and rebranded and grew Steel Horizons Group from a security technology startup into the sprawling empire it had become. He dated occasionally and kept each relationship at a careful, deliberate distance. He attended parties and summits and galas and delivered speeches about innovation and legacy. He did not think about Natalie Voss. Or rather, he thought about her in the way you think about an injury that is healed incorrectly, not constantly. But when the weather changed, he arrived at room 2409 at 6:58. The elevator doors opened onto a quiet corridor, the kind of hushed luxury that exists on executive floors, designed to make the people staying on them feel insulated from the ordinary friction of the world. Adrian walked the length of it without checking his phone, without rehearsing what he would say, without any of his usual preparations. He knocked. The door opened, and the young man standing in the doorway hit him with a recognition so immediate and physical that he actually stopped breathing for a moment. The jawline was his, the set of the shoulders was his, the eyes, dark, intelligent, assessing everything in the first instant of contact, were entirely Natalie's. But the frame, the posture, the particular quality of self-possessed calm in a moment that should have been overwhelming, those were his, produced by DNA he had contributed without knowing it, expressed in a person he had never met. "Mr. Steele," the young man said. His voice was steady, controlled, the way voices are controlled when the person speaking them has done significant internal work to arrive at this moment upright. "I am Caleb Voss." A pause. Just long enough. "Your son." Adrian stood in the doorway of Suite 2409, looking at his son for the first time, and every prepared response, every carefully maintained composure, every architecture of control he had built and maintained and weaponized for 20 years, dissolved with a speed that frightened him. He said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say that was adequate. Caleb held the door open wider. "Come in," he said, calm, measured, the voice of a young man who had prepared for this moment for a long time and had decided to meet it without performance. "There are things my mother needs to tell you, and things my brother and I would like you to hear." Adrian stepped inside. The door closed behind him. And everything that had been true before it opened was already, irrevocably beginning to change. The suite was warm and quietly lit, the kind of room designed for conversations that matter, not for performance, not for spectacle, but for the particular gravity of things that have been held too long and must finally be set down. Eli was seated at the writing desk near the window, a closed laptop before him, his hands folded with a stillness that Adrian recognized immediately as the deliberate kind, the kind that costs something to maintain. He looked up when Adrian entered, and the assessment in his eyes was rapid, thorough, and entirely undisguised. He was slightly leaner than his brother, his features a fraction more precise, his mother's architecture more dominant in the arrangement of his face. But the eyes, that particular depth, that quality of seeing things at multiple levels simultaneously, those were a mirror. Natalie stood near the window on the far side of the room. Her shawl was gone. Her posture was straight and composed, her hands clasped in front of her in the gesture Adrian had spent 20 years not thinking about, the one that meant she was nervous and had decided nobody would know it. She met his gaze directly. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You assumed I would." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I hoped you would." A quiet distinction. There is a difference. Caleb had moved to stand near his mother, not protectively, exactly, but with the particular proximity of two people who have navigated enough together to stand close without needing to explain it. The two of them side by side was something Adrian had no prior context for, and the impact of it. The simple visual reality of Natalie and his son standing together in a room that he had only just entered moved through him in a way he could not have named precisely. Eli uncrossed his hands and spoke for the first time. "Before anything else," he said, his voice quieter than Caleb's, more interior, "we want you to know that we asked her to do this, coming to your party, making contact. This wasn't only her decision." Adrian looked at him. "How long have you been planning it?" "Seriously, about a year." Eli glanced at his brother. "Theoretically, since we were 16 and understood enough to want to." "And before that?" "Before that, we just wanted to know what you were like in person." Caleb said it without apology. Straightforward, the way someone states a fact that has long since moved past the point of being painful. "We had photographs. We had stories. We knew who you were. We just didn't know you." The simplicity of it landed somewhere Adrian was not expecting. He turned to Natalie. And because he had spent the entire day with the file, with the photograph, with the specific mathematics of a timeline that kept resolving to the same answer, he did not ask the question he might have asked 24 hours earlier. The question of paternity was not a question. It had ceased to be a question the moment he had seen Caleb in the doorway. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning, from the day you went to his office." Natalie nodded once. She sat down. He sat across from her. The boys remained standing, near the window, close enough to be present without inserting themselves into what was about to pass between their parents. And Natalie Voss, for the first time in 20 years, told the complete truth. She did not dramatize it. That was the thing that would stay with Adrian longest afterward. Not the content, which was devastating enough, but the manner of it. The same precise, unsparing clarity she had always brought to technical documentation. Clean lines. No editorializing. Just the architecture of what had happened, laid out in full. Raymond Steele's summons had come on a Tuesday. A formal message, professional in tone, requesting her presence at his private office. Not the corporate headquarters, but the smaller, more personal space he maintained for meetings he did not want recorded in any official calendar. She had assumed it concerned a financial matter, some administrative crossover between the company's investor relations and her work managing Adrian's schedule and technical operations. She had been wrong. Raymond had been pleasant. That was the first thing she said about him, and she said it without irony, which made it more chilling than any other description could have been. He had offered her tea. He had asked about her work, her background, her family in the careful way of a man who already knows the answers and is establishing that he has done the research. Then he had opened a folder on his desk. Photographs of her father, a man who had died when she was 15, whom she had loved with the specific intensity of a child who loses a parent before they understand mortality, accepting money from a business associate of Raymond's. The photographs were from several years before her father's death, framed to suggest financial impropriety. The documentation was incomplete, selective, the kind of evidence that tells a story only if you are already predisposed to believe it. Then her mother. The hospitalization following her father's death, when grief had overwhelmed her mother's ability to function, and the medical system had provided the only intervention it knew. Clinical language applied to human devastation, rendered in Raymond's file as evidence of hereditary instability. Then Natalie herself. Her own hospitalization at 16, 3 months after her father died, when a teenage girl's grief had briefly overrun her capacity to continue. One frightening night that her mother had managed with the help of a hospital and a counselor who had known what to do, followed by recovery, by therapy, by the gradual return of a young woman who had decided, in the specific way that surviving something teaches you to decide, that she intended to build something substantial from the ruins of that year. Raymond had laid it out on his desk like a dealer laying cards, and his voice had remained reasonable throughout, almost kind. "Your father's reputation is recoverable," he had told her. "The photographs need never be made public. Your mother's history, and yours, need never become part of the narrative surrounding my son. All of this remains private and protected, as it should." She had understood by then what was coming. "My son has a destiny," Raymond had continued, "a legacy to build. The Steele name carries obligations that require the right foundation. You are not that foundation, Natalie. Not because of who you are, but because of what surrounds you. The vulnerabilities you carry are not yours to eliminate. They are simply facts, and facts have consequences in the world my son lives in." She had tried to hold her composure through this, had mostly succeeded. Then Raymond had said the real thing. "Adrian's company exists because I allow it to exist. His connections, his early investors, his first board relationships, those structures were built on my foundation, through my network, with my endorsement. He believes he built it himself." A pause. A small, precise smile. It is important that he continue to believe that, because that belief is what drives him. "But the foundation is mine, and I am prepared to withdraw it entirely if you give me a reason to." Adrian said nothing. Natalie watched him absorb this and continued. "He said he would dismantle everything systematically, not in one action. He wasn't that crude about it. He described it as a process, withdrawing the board relationships first, then the investor network, then ensuring that the security contracts you were developing would encounter regulatory interference. He had connections in that space, and he named them. He said he would watch you fail and that you would always wonder if your own instincts had been wrong, that the doubt would be the lasting damage." "And you believed him," Adrian said. His voice was very quiet. "I knew him," Natalie replied. She said it gently, but without retreat. "We both knew him, Adrian. Raymond Steele did not make empty threats. He made promises and he kept them. And the people who didn't take him seriously found out why that was a mistake. I had watched him operate through 2 years of being inside your company. I understood exactly what he was capable of. So you made the decision for me." The edge in his voice was controlled, but it was there. "I made the decision I had with the information I had." She held his gaze. "If I had told you what he threatened, would you have walked away from everything you'd built? At 26, when Reed Innovations was just beginning to become what you had always known it could be, would you honestly have said, 'None of this matters. Take the foundation. I choose her'?" The question sat in the air between them. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it. "Yes," he said at last. The word came out stripped of everything except its truth. "Yes, I would have." Natalie looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. Not disbelief, but the particular sorrow of someone hearing something they needed to hear 20 years too late. "I couldn't take that chance," she said softly. "I couldn't be the reason you lost it all. And I was 24 years old and frightened, and I made a choice that I believe was protecting you. I know now that it also took something from you that can never be returned. I know that. I have known it every day." "The letters," Caleb said from the window. He said it quietly, not intervening in the conversation between his parents so much as adding the piece they were approaching. "Tell him about the letters." Natalie looked at her son, then back at Adrian. "I wrote to you for the entire first year. After I left, once I was in Toronto, once I understood that I was pregnant, I wrote to you. Dozens of letters. Everything I've just told you, I put into letters. Your father's ultimatum, the pregnancy, why I had left and why I couldn't come back, but why I thought you deserved to know." Adrian went very still. "You never responded," she continued. "Month after month, nothing. By the time the twins were born, I had concluded that Raymond had shown you the file he'd compiled on my family, that you had seen it and decided I wasn't worth the complication, that he had been right, that your ambition would always be the primary thing." She paused. "I was wrong about that. I know I was wrong about that now. But at 24, alone in Toronto, with 2 newborns and your silence, it was the only conclusion that fit." "I never received a single letter," Adrian said. "I know." He intercepted them. "He kept them," Caleb said. His voice was steady. Matter of fact, in the way of someone who has had time to process something that once made him furious. We know because Mom's legal team found records 3 years ago, after Raymond died, when your estate attorneys were going through the document archives. He documented the intercepts, every one, kept the letters in a sealed file. Adrian stood up. He moved to the window. Not the window where Eli and Caleb stood, but the other one, the north-facing glass that showed the same skyline he had stared at from his penthouse the night before and from his office that morning. The city that had been the backdrop of his entire adult life, indifferent and magnificent, utterly uninterested in the specific damage of one family's long silence. He pressed one hand against the cold glass. His father had kept the letters. Not destroyed them, kept them, filed, documented. The meticulous record-keeping of a man who understood that information is only power if it remains accessible, who had perhaps imagined a day when he might need to produce evidence of what he had done, or perhaps had simply never been able to relinquish control even over the things he had stolen. 20 years, an entire childhood, 2 boys who had grown into men, a woman who had built an empire from the ruins of a choice she had made to protect him, letters he had never read, questions he had never known to ask, and at the center of it, his father's precise, deliberate hand. "He died 3 years ago," Adrian said to the glass, not asking, working through it. "Yes," Natalie said. "And you came now." "Yes." "Because he was the threat." "He was always the threat," she paused. "And because they're adults now. Because whatever happens between us, whatever you decide about me, about the past, they are old enough to make their own choices about their relationship with you. I could not make that choice for them any longer. I should not have been the one holding it at all." He turned back from the window. He looked at his sons. Eli, who had not moved from the desk, who had been watching the exchange between his parents with the still, total attention of someone cataloging everything, storing it, understanding it at multiple levels simultaneously. Caleb, who stood with his arms loosely crossed, his expression open, his eyes carrying something that Adrian needed several seconds to identify. It was not anger. It was not judgment. It was hope. Careful, realistic, unsentimental hope. The hope of a young man who has thought seriously about what he wants and has decided it is worth the risk of wanting it. "I don't know how to do this," Adrian said. He said it to all 3 of them, but his eyes were on his sons. "I want to be honest with you about that. There is no version of this moment that I was prepared for, and I am not a man who handles being unprepared with any particular grace." The corner of Caleb's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the precursor to one. "We know," he said. "We've read a lot about you. All of it complimentary, I'm sure. Most of it accurate," Eli said. The first thing he had said, in some time, delivered with a dryness that was so specifically, precisely Adrian's own register, that the recognition of it moved through him like electricity. He looked at Natalie. She was watching her sons with an expression he recognized from the photograph, that particular quality of a mother watching her children become themselves, simultaneously proud and moved, and trying not to show how moved. "What did you tell them about me?" he asked. He needed to know. He needed to understand what shape he had occupied in their lives before tonight. Natalie looked at him. "The truth," she said, "the parts of you that I knew, that you built things because you couldn't help it, that problem-solving was as natural to you as breathing, that you were harder on yourself than you were on anyone else, though you hid it better from the world, that your laugh was rare, but when it came it was worth the wait." She paused. "That they got their analytical minds from you, that I always thought that was a gift worth acknowledging, whatever else had happened between us." Adrian sat back down. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight and texture and a direction to it. The silence of 4 people simultaneously processing the same enormity from 4 different angles. "I'd like to start somewhere," he said finally. He chose the word deliberately. Somewhere. Not anywhere. Not everywhere. Somewhere specific, honest, realistic about the distance between where they were and where anything resembling normal might eventually live. "If you'll let me. I'm not asking to recover what was lost. I understand that's not available. I'm asking for the chance to be present for what comes next." Caleb looked at Eli. That twin communication, instantaneous, complete, requiring no translation. Eli nodded once. "We'd like that," Caleb said simply. "We've known about you our entire lives. We'd like to actually know you. If you have ever misjudged someone's silence, if you have ever interpreted the absence of a person as proof that they didn't care without knowing what was keeping them away, share this video with someone who needs to hear that the story is rarely as simple as the ending suggests. Because Natalie did not leave because she stopped loving him, and Adrian did not search because he believed, wrongly, that there was nothing left to find. They had both been living inside someone else's story. And it had taken 20 years, and 2 extraordinary sons, and one woman's decision that the truth was finally owed, to begin to find their way back to their own. They ordered dinner to the suite and stayed until nearly 2 in the morning. The conversation moved the way it does between people who are simultaneously strangers and intimate, lurching forward and then catching itself, finding unexpected pockets of ease between the difficult passages, occasionally funny in the way that happens when tension finally locates a release valve and everyone in the room needs it at the same moment. Caleb talked about Voss Meridian's operational structure with a fluency that made Adrian's most senior executives look, in memory, slightly complacent. He had not read the textbooks first and then applied them. He had operated from instinct and refined the instinct through experience, which was the method Adrian had always considered the only one that produced genuine competence. Eli described his current research, a theoretical framework for applying quantum sequencing principles to financial security prediction, with the particular combination of precision and enthusiasm that characterizes people who have found the work they were built for. He had Adrian's way of explaining complex systems, starting from the foundation, building upward, never assuming the listener's comprehension without checking it. Adrian asked questions. Real questions. Not the practiced conversational variety he deployed at events, but the ones generated by genuine curiosity about 2 human beings whose existence was simultaneously brand new and the most familiar thing he had ever encountered. He asked about their childhood, and they answered without performance, the specific details that constitute an actual life rather than a summary of one. The summer Caleb had attempted to teach himself sailing and had capsized the same rented vessel 3 times before the marina had tactfully suggested a lesson. The phase Eli had gone through at 14 of disassembling every electronic device in the house to understand its architecture, which had resulted in 2 broken laptops, 1 non-functional dishwasher, and a television that subsequently worked better than it had before. He asked what they had wanted growing up when they thought about him. Caleb answered first. To understand where certain things came from, he said, "You grow up knowing you're like someone you've never met, and it creates this gap. Not painful, exactly, just incomplete." Eli was quieter about it. "I wanted to ask you questions," he said. "I always had questions I couldn't ask anyone else." "Ask them now," Adrian said. And Eli did. Technical questions. Mostly, the architecture of early decisions at Reed Innovations, the logic behind certain pivots, a specific acquisition from 12 years ago that had seemed counterintuitive and turned out to be generationally important. Adrian answered each one and then, almost without deciding to, began asking his own about Eli's research, about the theoretical framework, about the mathematical principles underlying quantum sequencing in ways that his own team had not yet considered. They were 45 minutes into a conversation that had stopped being about the past entirely and become something else when Natalie said softly, "There it is." Both of them looked at her. She was watching them with the expression that would later become one of Adrian's most carefully held memories, something between recognition and relief, the look of a woman who had been carrying the weight of an incompleteness for 20 years and was watching it, finally, resolve. "The conversation you would have been having for 18 years, she said, if things had been different." A silence. Then Caleb said, very quietly, "We have time." It was past midnight when they finally acknowledged that the evening had to end. The hotel's kitchen had stopped taking orders 2 hours earlier. The city outside had reached that particular late-night quietude where only the essential sounds remained. Distant traffic, the occasional siren, the ambient hum of a city that never fully sleeps, but does occasionally lower its voice. At the door, the exchange of numbers was uncomplicated. Both boys gave him their direct lines. He gave them the actual one, not the corporate routing number that went through Jonah first. He turned to Natalie last. She was standing a few feet back while her sons said their goodbyes. Her arms were loosely crossed, her expression carrying the particular quality of someone who has completed something enormous and has not yet fully located themselves on the other side of it. "We have more to discuss," he said. "You and I." "Yes." "Not tonight." "No, not tonight." She held his gaze steadily. "Take the time you need. I've waited 20 years. I can manage a few more days." He looked at her for a moment, really looked, without the filter of shock or anger or 20 years of accumulated narrative. The woman who had been 24 and alone and frightened and had built, from that position, something that $4 billion could not entirely measure, who had raised two sons who were remarkable not only because of their intelligence but because of their character, which was the harder thing to produce and the more meaningful thing to observe. He said, "You did well." She understood what he meant. She did not pretend otherwise. "We all did the best we could," she said, "with what we had." He nodded once and left. 22 days later, Adrian Steele walked into Salvatore's restaurant in Brooklyn and felt the particular disorientation of a place that has remained unchanged while everything surrounding it has been transformed. He had chosen it, which surprised him when he caught himself doing it. He had pulled up the name from memory, from a layer of memory he had believed adequately sealed, and typed it into a message to Natalie before he had consciously decided to do so. A small restaurant on Montague Street. Family-owned. A back room that seated 12, but was almost always reserved for 2. Red wine and the specific warmth of a place that had never tried to be anything other than what it was. She was already there when he arrived, which he had not expected. He was 3 minutes early, and she was seated at the table, her hands folded around a glass of water, her expression quiet. The restaurant owner had placed a bottle of the Burgundy they had both favored, years ago, at the center of the table without being asked. Like old times, the old man had told him at the door, with the unearned sentimentality of someone who remembers only the good parts of other people's stories. Not quite, Adrian had thought, but he had smiled and thanked him. He sat down across from her, not at the head of the table, across from her, which was the only position that made sense for a conversation between two people who needed to see each other clearly. She poured his wine. He accepted it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The back room held the particular quiet of a space insulated from the street. Muffled and warm, the sound of the main restaurant a distant register. "You chose this place," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He considered the question. "Because it was ours," he said. "Before everything else, it was ours, and I needed somewhere that wasn't contaminated by the version of the story I spent 20 years telling myself." She nodded, understanding it without requiring more. He began to talk. He told her what the 20 years had looked like from his side, not the version that had appeared in profiles and Forbes cover stories, but the actual interior of it. The morning she had gone, the note, the way grief had been so quickly overrun by anger, because anger was operational and grief was not, because he had a company to build, and a father whose voice was always there, quiet and certain, saying, "I told you so," in the particular register of a man who has bet on human weakness and won. He told her about the night, 8 years in, when he had nearly called her, had found her name in an old contact file, and had sat with his phone in his hand for 40 minutes before closing the file and going back to the quarterly report he had been reviewing. Had told himself it was because there was nothing useful to say, had known, even then, that this was not the real reason. He told her about his father's death 3 years ago, the estate, the document archives, the sealed file his attorney had flagged as personal correspondence, unrelated to business holdings, how he had put it aside because there had been too much else to manage and had not returned to it, and now understood with a particular and specific fury that the file had contained 20 years of letters that he had never read. Natalie listened to all of it without interrupting. This was one of the things he had forgotten about her, the quality of her attention, the way she listened without preparing her response while you were still speaking, without filling the spaces with reassurances or redirection. She simply received what was being said and held it until she was ready to answer. He kept them to maintain control, she said, when he had finished, even over something he had already managed. That was always the thing about Raymond. The management didn't end when the outcome was secured. He needed the documentation, the evidence of his own capability. I know. Adrian turned his wine glass slowly on the white tablecloth. I've been going through the rest of his files since the boys told me. There are other things. Other instances of the same pattern. Arrangements I had attributed to luck or timing that were his interventions. Competitors who had disappeared from my path in ways I had never fully understood. He paused. My entire career, Natalie. The foundation was always his, exactly as he told you. And everything I built on it, every decision I believed was mine. Stop, she said. He looked up. What you built was yours, she said. The vision was yours. The technology was yours. The work was yours. Your father provided a foundation and then convinced you it was everything, because that was how he maintained leverage. But foundations are not buildings. What stands above ground is the thing that matters. She held his gaze. Don't let him take that too. The simplicity of it. The same quality she had always had, finding the essential thing inside a complex structure and naming it without ceremony. He was quiet for a moment. What did you tell them? He asked, when they asked why you never went back. Natalie looked down at her glass, then back up. That I had been afraid, she said. That fear had made me assume the worst of your silence when I should have found another way to know. That protecting them had sometimes looked, from the outside, like protecting myself from a risk that was mine to take. She paused. I told them that the things we do from love are not always the things love would have chosen, that we make the decisions available to us, not the ones we would have made with better information. And they accepted that. Caleb accepted it. Eli wanted to map the decision tree and identify the points where a different choice could have been made. The corner of her mouth lifted. He spent 2 weeks on it. Came to me with a diagram. What did the diagram show? That there were 3 points at which the outcome could have been different, and that at each of them, the person with the most information made the choice most likely to appear protective while actually serving their own interests. She looked at him steadily. The person with the most information at every point was your father. Adrian absorbed this. My son built a decision tree, exonerating his mother and indicting his grandfather. He would say he built a decision tree, identifying the primary agent of a negative outcome. A pause. But yes. Something shifted between them, not laughter, exactly, but the pressure of something that wanted to be laughter. The specific relief of discovering that even in the middle of this, there was something recognizable, something human and specific in theirs. He reached into his jacket pocket. He placed a small velvet box on the table between them. Natalie went very still. He had found it in the estate archives 3 weeks ago. His father's safe deposit holdings, cataloged by the estate attorney in the careful language of inherited assets. One item described simply as personal property, costume jewelry, no assessed value. His father had hidden it in plain sight inside the blandest possible description, and it had sat in a numbered box in a midtown bank for 20 years. The ring was exactly as he had designed it, platinum band, emerald-cut diamond, 2 flanking emeralds. Her birthstone, chosen before he knew she was carrying his children, because he had paid attention to the things she loved and remembered them. The jeweler's finished work was immaculate. The ring had been waiting, preserved perfectly, for 2 decades. He had it too, Adrian said. His voice was even, but only just. It was finished the week you left. He must have taken it when he arranged everything else. He paused. The jeweler called you about the design specifications. That's when you found out I had been planning to ask. A few weeks after I arrived in Toronto, Natalie said. Her voice was very quiet. Yes. I thought you should have it, he said. I'm not asking anything. Not tonight, and maybe not ever, depending on what's true between us now. But it was yours. It was always meant to be yours. And my father took that from you the same way he took everything else. She looked at the box for a long moment without touching it. Then she reached out and opened it. The ring caught the candlelight and held it. 20 years in a bank vault, and it looked exactly as it had been made. She looked at it for a very long time. Then she closed the box gently and placed it on the table between them, not handing it back, but not taking it either, leaving it in the space between them, which was where, perhaps, it belonged for now. "Keep it somewhere visible," she said, "not in a vault." He understood. He put it back in his pocket. They stayed at Salvatore's until the restaurant closed around them, the owner too polite or too sentimental to hurry them. They talked about the collaboration between their companies, which was genuinely the most interesting business conversation Adrian had had in years, because Natalie's approach to security technology was built on principles that challenged his own in ways that were productive rather than merely competitive. They talked about the boys, the specific texture of their personalities, the ways they were alike and the ways they were not, the parenting decisions that had worked and the ones that had not. At some point, they talked about what came next. Not with a plan. Not with the kind of structured intentionality that both of them defaulted to in professional contexts. Just with the honesty of two people who had been given an unexpected opportunity and were trying to determine, together, what they wanted to do with it. "I don't know who we are to each other now," Natalie said. She said it without apology, simply as a true thing that needed to be said. "We are not who we were. We have not been in each other's lives. We are the parents of two extraordinary people, and we are professional equals, and we have a shared history that is complicated. I don't know what we are beyond that." "Neither do I," Adrian said, "but I'd like to find out." She looked at him across the table. "No timelines," she said. "No expectations. We find out slowly." "Agreed. And if it turns out we are simply good at being their parents together and good at working alongside each other, and that is the shape of it. If that is all it becomes, then that is more than I had yesterday," he said simply, "and considerably more than I deserve." Something settled in her expression, not resolution exactly. Something quieter and more durable than resolution. "You are harder on yourself than anyone else," she said. "You always were. You always said that. You never believed it." "I'm trying to," he said. And it was true. They walked out of Salvatore's at 11:47, the Brooklyn street quiet and cold around them, their cars waiting on opposite sides of the road. They stood on the pavement between them and looked at each other in the orange wash of a streetlight. Not the young people they had been, the last time they had stood outside this restaurant. Not the strangers they had briefly been to each other at a New Year's Eve party 3 weeks ago. Something in between. Something new, which was the only thing they had left to be. "The videos," Natalie said. She had mentioned it in passing during dinner, and he had not responded at the time, storing it for the moment when he could receive it properly. "Their childhood. I have everything. The boys said you should have them." "I'd like that very much," he said. She nodded. "I'll have them sent this week." She offered her hand. He took it. Held it for a moment. The particular deliberateness of a gesture that both of them understood was carrying more than its surface suggested. Then released it. "Drive safely," he said. "You, too." He watched her car pull away into the city's current. Then he stood alone on the Brooklyn pavement for a while, his hand in his jacket pocket, feeling the small, velvet box against his fingers. Not hers yet. Not his alone, exactly. In the space between them, where the truth had been deposited and the future had not yet declared itself. Which was, he was learning, the place where the only real things lived. 4 months later, the collaboration between Steel Horizons and Voss Meridian was generating outcomes that neither company had achieved independently, and the industry press was running out of superlatives. Caleb served as the primary liaison, managing the integration with a composure and diplomatic precision that made his 23-year-old counterparts in both organizations look, by quiet consensus, somewhat underprepared. Eli visited New York in February, ostensibly for a conference at Columbia that had invited him to present his research. He spent 3 evenings that week at his father's penthouse. The first, they ate takeout, and Adrian asked questions about the research for 4 hours straight. The second, Eli went through his father's library and made a pile of 12 books he said he needed to read, which Adrian told him to take. The third evening, they sat on the terrace above the city, the same terrace where Adrian had stood on New Year's Eve, alone with a cold scotch and the first fracture in his certainty, and talked about what it meant to build something. Not in the abstract. Specifically, what it cost, what it required, what it gave back, and what it took that was never returned. Was it worth it? Eli asked, near midnight, looking out at the skyline that his father had helped shape. All of it. The years. The cost of it. Adrian considered the question seriously, because his son deserved a serious answer. "Ask me again in 10 years, he said. "I think the answer is different now than it would have been a year ago, and different again in a decade." Eli looked at him. Different how? "A year ago, I would have said yes, unambiguously, that everything I had built was the primary measure." Adrian paused. "Now I think the buildings are not the measure. What you build for, and with, and toward, that is the measure, and I am only beginning to understand what that means." Eli was quiet for a moment. "Mom said something like that once," he said, "when I was maybe 12. She said that the company was the vehicle, not the destination, that she had built it in order to do something, not in order to have built it." "She was right," Adrian said. "She was right about most things. I was too young and too certain to understand that at the time." Eli smiled. The smile was entirely Natalie's, warm, knowing, carrying layers. "She said you'd say that eventually." "She told you that?" "She said, give him time. He'll get there." Adrian laughed. The real laugh, rare as she had always said, but worth the wait. In March, Natalie came to New York for a series of meetings connected to the collaboration. She stayed at the Monarch. Adrian had offered the penthouse spare room twice and been declined twice, and had understood, without it being stated, that the pace of this was hers to set, and that his role was to make space and not to fill it prematurely. They had dinner on the second evening, not at Salvatore's this time, somewhere new, which felt significant in a way neither of them named. They talked for 4 hours and parted at the front of the restaurant with the ease of people who are no longer required to manage the distance between them, because the distance has become something comfortable, something chosen rather than imposed. Outside, on the pavement, she said, "The ring." He looked at her. "I've been thinking about it," she said, "about what you said, that it was always meant to be mine." "Yes. I think," she paused, choosing, as she always did, the precise word. "I think I'd like to hold on to that, not as a promise, just as evidence that something was real before it was taken." She looked at him steadily. "Would that be acceptable?" "Natalie," he said, "it has always been yours." She nodded once. He took it from his pocket and placed it in her palm, and she closed her hand around it, and neither of them said anything further about it, which was exactly right. They were not where they had been. They were not trying to recover something lost. They were two people, changed by 20 years and the weight of a truth too long withheld, feeling their way toward something that had not existed before and could not be named yet, which was, as it turned out, the most honest beginning available to them. 1 year after Natalie Voss had walked into Adrian Steele's New Year's Eve party and refused to flinch, 4 people gathered at a lake cottage north of Toronto, a modest place on still water that smelled of pine, and the specific piece of a location chosen entirely for love and not for impression. It was the first time all 4 of them had marked the occasion of its anniversary. They did not do so with ceremony. There was dinner, which Caleb largely managed because he had inherited his mother's patience in the kitchen, which she herself acknowledged was the one domestic quality she had managed to model consistently. There was a long afternoon walk along the shoreline, the November air cold, but not brutal, the trees holding their last color against the approaching winter. In the evening they sat on the dock as the last of the light dissolved into the water, and someone opened a bottle of wine, and for a long time nobody felt the need to fill the silence. It was Eli who spoke first. "What do we call this?" he said, not plaintively, with the genuine analytical curiosity that was his most consistent characteristic. "The 4 of us. What is this?" "Family?" Caleb said immediately. The word without qualifying language, without hedging, without the careful brackets that might have surrounded it a year ago. Adrian looked at Natalie. She was watching the water. Her profile in the dying light, the precise bones, the expression that carried its weight quietly, the hands folded in her lap with a stillness that was no longer the effortful kind, the stillness of someone who has set down a burden that had been hers for too long and is still surprised, occasionally, by the lightness of the absence. She felt him looking and turned, and he thought of all the things that had been lost. The letters, the years, the ring in a bank vault. 2 boys learning to walk in a house in Toronto while he was building an empire 3,000 miles away and believing, wrongly, that he had been left behind. He thought of what his father had taken, and then he thought of what remained. An extraordinary woman who had built something $4 billion could not fully measure. 2 sons who had inherited the best of both of them and had, somehow, exceeded both. The particular impossible grace of a second chance arrived not in the shape of a return to something lost, but in the shape of something entirely new, built carefully and honestly from the only material available, the truth and the people it had finally reached. Family, Adrian said, simply and with certainty, which was the only register this deserved. Natalie held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the water and she smiled, the real one, the warm and open thing that had always been specific to her, that he had spent 20 years not thinking about and would spend whatever remained thinking about freely. The water held the last of the light, and 4 people who had found each other through loss and honesty and the particular mercy of time sat together on a dock at the end of the year and let the silence be what it was. Enough, finally, completely irreversibly enough. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that silence is not always abandonment, that truth is not always late, that the people we have underestimated are often carrying more than we imagined, share it with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late for an honest beginning. Some wounds do not close. They become part of the architecture. And what we build above them, if we build with courage and with honesty and with a willingness to see people as they actually are, rather than as our fear has drawn them, that is the measure. Not the years lost. The life built from the truth of them. Subscribe to Untold Desires by Mr. Lewis for stories that remind us what we are capable of when we finally stop running from what is real. Because the most important stories are never the ones that end perfectly. They are the ones that begin again.